uh, so thank you everybody for joining. We're still, as I mentioned, waiting for last panelist to join in too, but she still has some technical issues, but I'm sure she'll be with us very soon. So let's start. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third and last day of this year's digital only 154 forum. I'm Julia. This is my colleague Yvette. We're the founders and editors-in-chief of Contemporary End and Contemporary End America Latina, and as well this year's curators of this very special and so far very great 154 forum. Maybe just some quick words. During the last days, we've seen and heard fantastic and as well very important exchanges and discussions between cultural producers from Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and the global diaspora, focusing on acute topics such as invisibility, modes of resistance, or alternative forms of speaking to audiences in the frame of the global pandemic, obviously. And for the next hour, our panel titled A View from Another Side of Things brings together a great group of cultural producers from Afro-Colombian perspectives to discuss the notions of inequality and invisibility in the context of Colombia's creative and arts sector. So we're looking extremely forward to it, and thanks so much for being here with us from all over the place, literally. Maybe three important infos for you, the audience. We have a live translator, Maria, for Spanish into English. So if you prefer to listen to the panel in English or in Spanish, please choose in the below menu the language or interpretation menu what language you want to listen to. This panel will be again recorded for people to listen to it afterwards, or if they can't attend now. And finally, please don't be shy to write comments and questions in the chat below, and we'll be happy to share them with our panelists. And I quickly want to introduce our moderator, Will Furtado, there, before handing over to him. So Will Furtado is a non-binary artist, writer and editor exploring power dynamics, cultural dislocation, and the intersection of pop culture, decolonial thoughts, Blackness, queerness, and technology. Born in Portugal, of Guatemalan and Cape Verdean heritage, Will is based in Berlin in Germany. Since 2017, Will is the deputy editor of Contemporary End and previously the art and digital editor of Sleek magazine. In their practice, or artistic practice, so Will works with images and text to explore decoloniality and global South epistemology. So thanks so much and welcome. And I hand over to you, Will.
Hola a todos, buenos días.
Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Julia and Yvette, for the invite. And thank you to 154 for organizing and for inviting us. And thank you to all the guests and those participating wherever you are. So this conversation will deal with art and Afro-Colombianity, and I am going to introduce very shortly, I'm going to introduce our guests. I'm going to start with Ramiro Camelo, who is a curator at Mimala 2, which is an artist-run space in Finland. He obtained his master's degree in curating contemporary art at the Royal College of Art in London. Also, he has conducted some curatorial projects, includes in Royal College Art Gallery in London and also Galleria Santa Fe in Bogota. We also have Nicolás Vizcaíno Sánchez. He is an Afro-descendant artist based in Bogota, working from multimedia installations, critical writing and editorial practice, obviously he has conducted curatorial projects. Among some of his projects is the Bogota International Book Fair, Eva International Islands Biennale, and also the Feria Plana in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And finally, Carmen San Mangera. She's a plastic artist from Santiago de Cali in Colombia with a degree from the Departmental Institute of Fine Arts in Cali. Her artistic research deals with the basically all in all his work, but basically in the installation he explores blackness and how the social ethical identity goes beyond um, to touch commercial, political, and historic aspects. His work has been shown in different exhibitions in the Arab Emirates states in Ecuador, the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Ecuador, and Colombia. And I would just like to share with you that this year I've lived for 5 months in Bogota and Medellin. Also, she has conducted some investigations on the art and Afro-Colombian or Afro-Colombianness, and she has also researched the liberating aspect of the dances with the appropriation of the white mixed race paradigm. Colombia is very much known by its biodiversity, but Colombia has a demographic and ethnic diversity which is amazing. The local representation of art in Bogota exists, it is a reality, but the national representation is not that evident, it's not that clear. And we can see that in the media. Bogota itself, it is the art of contemporary art in Colombia. It is a center, it is a hub. It's a very much white and mixed-race city, and this influences people from racialized groups and their access to contemporary art and the type of work which is produced. That is to say, the option of working with arts for people of racialized groups is not a normalized option. Therefore, I'm going to ask my guests, I'm going to ask them to tell me a short story of the careers on arts within the Colombian context. I'm going to start with Carmenza.
Sí, Carmenza, ¿me escuchan?
Carmenza, can you hear me?
¿O Ramiro?
Or Ramiro?
Hola, Will. Sí, bueno,
Hello, yes.
yo creo que Carmenza todavía no ha
I
resuelto
don't think Carmenza has been able to solve her issues
bueno, tengo que decir primero
with the technicalities.
dos
But well,
años
first
en
of all, I have to
Bogotá.
tell you that I left Colombia
Uno,
in
retorné
2001.
por un
I
trabajo
came back
en
for a few years in 2014 until
mi visión
2016,
más o
and
menos
obviously my view has to do very much with my life over there, which was basically in the 90s. I studied sociology at the National University where we had a group, and I remember in 1990 we had a group of Afro-Colombians that we started a editorial a publishing project. It was a magazine which was published every time we could. And our interest really was to publish this magazine twice a year. But I mean, we ended up just being able to publish once a year. It was called Afro-America. That was the name of the magazine, in which a group of more or less 10 university students at the National University of Colombia, we did activism in a very academic way. I mean, the idea was to have a more sort of a wider approach, but it ended up being a more academic type of magazine. In those years, I started organizing exhibitions, and it was very evident that there weren't many Afro-Colombian artists. There were two Afro-Colombian artists in the National University. One it was Liliana Angulo, and the other one was an artist, I can't remember her name, but there were only two Afro-Colombian students at the National University in the art department, and we all knew them. For example, the National University at that time, I think they had at the time 15,000. In the Bogota campus, from those, I think we were 20, 25 Afro-Colombian students at that time at the university. So that gives you an idea of more or less the lack of representation we had at the university in those years, which was between the 90s, yeah, up to the 97.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Nicolás?
Nicolas? Hi, Will. Differently from what Ramiro tells us, not only because of the generation, but also because I went to a private university here in Bogota, the access of Black people in general to the university. I mean, we're not even talking about the arts career, but it was a very limited access. This was a university which is much more elitist and much more closed. It is also much smaller than the public funded university. And during my time at the university, we were just a few of us who were just around there. And it was another one was my brother and my cousin. And I was the only Afro descendant who acknowledged himself as a Afro descendant, and it really has a harsh impact in what later on was my academic trajectory and my training, really. But coming from this fine arts and arts background, the question has always been which are the spaces, not only for the training for formation, but also which are the socializing spaces of racialized people like we are, or those like myself who acknowledge ethnically, who acknowledge our ethnicity. If we go to Santiago de Cali, probably Carmenza will be able to explain us a little bit more about that city. That city, the Black people are more visible there in Santiago de Cali, but other than that, we do have big bottlenecks in other areas in Colombia. So more than anything else, I think that experience has been very much marked by that experience I've
Has hablado del
lived.
reconocimiento y
You
la
also talked about
aceptación
the
de
acknowledgement, the
estos
identification of being black, of being Afro-descendant.
sí que hay como también personas que son
There are also people who are Afro-descendant, but they don't
es como esa
identify themselves as black
pues
people.
lo que existe en Colombia justamente
What we have
para
in
los que no
Colombia
conocen Colombia
precisely,
pues
and
Colombia
for those of you who don't know
en Colombia
Colombia very
hay
well,
por lo menos
in Colombia we
tres o cuatro
have at
categorías
least three, four
digamos
category.
específicamente en derecho pues
Like for example,
como afrodescendiente, raizal,
like well, we have different names, like
y
palenquero, as we
esta
say
lista
in
muestra
Spanish,
los
and
por otro lado tienen que ver con la
well,
consideración
you have this has to do really with the specific aspects geographically located,
sobre todo
and that's very much with the origin of these people, but also to the this has to do very much with the political process that people identifying themselves with. So yes, there is a process of identities, several identities, which at the same time it works like a definition framework. Obviously, there are people who just don't care about that. They don't identify themselves as Afro descendants. However, yes, there are, I mean,
bien cambiante según el contexto.
it is very changing, really, according to the context. I would like to say something. I remember probably what really defined the concept of ethnicity is what I had in our identity card. And my first identity card, it is the race or the ethnicity. I remember the definition of a race in my identity card. It was trigueño. That's the name given, which trigueño is, I mean, the color of trigueño. Trigueño makes reference to the wheat. So it didn't say black. It was like either white or trigueño. That's the name given in Spanish for something which is not really black nor white. I think that concept was removed, I mean, to have a category for the race in the identity card.
y cuáles son las razones
And
por las
which
cuales
are the reasons why
habrá quizás
we
personas
have people,
afrodescendientes que no
Afro-descendant people who don't identify, who don't want to identify like Afro-descendant in Colombia. So there is a friend of mine who prepared a documentary entitled Black with Black Gives Hate. I asked him if he has this online. This is a small short video clip in YouTube. The documentary really tried to present the indigenous racism. He lives in Cartagena, and it is the only place where I have a story, and I'm not going to tell you this story, but in Cartagena there is a racism, which is a very, very, very much entrenched racism. And many people know that the only way to overcome racism is to making them whiter. I mean, that's basically to use your hair straighter and to dress in a way that you can really overcome these barriers and to be able to work for the government and things like that. There are many reasons really why these people decide to whiten themselves. So that's why my friend, talks about the indigenous racism in Cartagena, and people saying that many people from the black race, they try to move to really to sort of stay away from the blackness, to be a bit more neutral, to be able to move in both places of society.
que se procesa
Um,
incluso en un contexto de arte contemporáneo, o sea, artistas en este
do you think
contexto
this is different in the contemporary art scene?
español.
Do you think artists are a bit different in doing this? How do you see this? I don't think so. Sometimes within what I was telling you about that we had a magazine that someone I would like to mention. I don't think many people know. It is Angel Pérez Escobar. I don't know if you've heard his name. He's a journalist, a Colombian journalist, a person that for us, he was a very great influencer. He was the only Afro-Colombian journalist in Colombia in the 90s. He had a column in a national paper, and he wrote the Regain story in four parts in the El Espectador, which was a nationwide newspaper. And we wanted to put together a group. Our dream was really to have a magazine like the equivalent of Ebony in Colombia. And he was a person we met up with to see if it was possible. And we realized that was very difficult. Why? Because the most important Afro-Colombian people in Colombia, they belong to music or sports. Other than that, we don't have anybody else. So the only person with maybe became a main figure outside sports and music, who is someone who's not interested in in politics, was Cordoba. We were interested in how we could get to Colombian musicians and to Colombian sports people who were really interested in talking about the race and the ethnicity and to be able to advocate for blackness. But we realized these people really weren't very much interested in talking about race and ethnicity, because for them it was like closing down doors. So yeah, we had the possibility of had in our hands the giant steps copy, and we said we don't have that equivalent. Karim Ajubar, this sports person in Colombia, who would like to talk about a race like Nina Simone, for example. We didn't have anyone equivalent to that in Colombia, because the people, the big figures in Colombia, Afro-descendant in sports and in music, other than Elia Zapata and just a few of them that she died from a malaria complication when she was in Africa. But other than that, people, important, famous people in sports and music, they weren't really interested in talking about race. And so that's why the dream we had never came to fruition.
Could you Yeah, now, Maria, I just thought maybe you can ask Carmenza.
Yes, I'm trying. I've talked to Will about that.
I think she can't hear.
Yes, I I'm trying to talk to Will to see if we,
and she can.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay. Yes. Maybe do this.
because I don't think she can hear me.
Oh, yeah.
Julia.
Maybe ask the next question and Nicolás and Ramiro can start answering and she can read it at the same time and then
Okay.
answer the question coming third place. You know what I mean?
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Bueno, continuando y hablando todo
Okay, so moving on and talking about
lo que has dicho ahorita,
what you have just
Ramiro.
said, Ramiro.
La cita
The
de este foro que es
main topic of the quote of this forum, who is an Afro-Peruvian artist, enters. He said, I was like a New York black person trapped in Peru. And for me, it seems very important to really have read this quote. It's very specific for Peru,
porque en Colombia la representación,
because in
por
Colombia,
ejemplo,
representation, for
en
example,
artes más
and
populares,
more
sí
popular
existen
arts,
un montón,
it is something valid, and we do have lots of
pero
them, like as you said, in music and sports. But I'm more specifically talking here about music like cumbia, salsa, champeta. I'm talking about the niche group who are,
sí, que una grande
yes, there is a
representación.
wider Afro-descendant representation in Colombia.
Entonces, creo que hay un
So I
desequilibrio
think there is an imbalance of cultural Afro representation in Colombia, but there is something. Whereas in Peru, it is much less than what we can see in Colombia, and more especially with regards to dance. We have the Palenque from Elias Zapato Olivera. We have also the Acaju. We have the Lanfrog and others.
cómo ves la
How do you
representación
see
popular
the popular representation, the
en relación a
Afro-Colombian,
su separación o aislamiento del arte
Afro-Colombian
contemporáneo que se
representation
ve en museos y
in
galerías?
contemporary arts? And
¿Esa pregunta es para mí o alguien
Para
más me puede?
todos, pero
Bueno, entonces
puedes
yo creo que
empezar.
Carmenza ya entró.
with us now, is Carmenza with us?
¿Quién nos escucha?
No, I think she's on the other channel.
No, she's not. She's not hearing me. No, I'm checking.
In the chat for her? Yeah.
Lo que
I'm trying to talk to her in the Spanish channel, but she can't hear me. Probably she doesn't have the updated Zoom.
Yes. That's why Will, maybe you can write down the question. Yes.
I just did.
Ah, yeah, cool. Because I don't see it in the chat.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
If you put it in the chat and then Maria, you can switch to the English channel.
Yes.
Ah, yeah. I see.
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Maybe you can read it down, Maria,
Okay.
Carmenza, in the English channel.
Okay. Carmenza, ¿me oyes?
Maybe we could.
Carmenza, ¿me oyes? She's on mute. Carmenza, ¿me oyes?
Pero sí me hago entender con la pregunta.
Sí, pues si quieren yo voy arrancando mientras
Sí,
también
sí,
Carmenza puede.
So I'm going to start while we see if Carmenza can hear us.
Sí,
Okay, so
si entiendo bien es
if I understood your
cuál es
question correctly, it is the idea on which are these separation lines within the between the visual art, the contemporary arts, and the other representations, more understood as popular culture, as we normally call
en
it.
Colombia yo identifico un
In
proceso
Colombia, I
más
identify a process which has to do
creo
very
que es
much, in my opinion,
más bien una opinión bastante personal,
it is a very
que
personal opinion, this one,
cierto
but I think it
proceso
has to
de
do
invisibilidad
with
de
the spaces of possibility of managing representations. And I feel that historically, music has been a space of possibility which has even resisted itself to the whitening, and it has been always present, and it is in the music of the Caribbean coast, which are one of the front runners in entering this conversation, the Caribbean coast. Um, when we get into this conversation of the Black identities, and it is within the conversation between Cartagena, Barranquilla, and in the Magdalena, and this conversation with the Antilles, with even with Western Africa, when we talk about the 20th century. And this communication, this constant communication of the musical language, I believe there is a section or a space within the Colombian society, which is a very important one, which managed to conquer the autonomy, the legitimacy that it enjoys today. The champeta, for example, or the salsa music, which is the salsa made in Colombia, not only the international salsa. And obviously, the influence and the lap of the cumbia and the vallenato, but also I see this for the Pacific coast and even for the movement into the countryside and the Pacific coast, with the music's influenced by hip hop in Buenaventura because it's a harbor city and because it generates a new spectrum of music with the choco and with the contact of Panama dembow as well, and different music genres. What I'm talking about here is that there is this transnational conversation very close to what we can do now today, speaking from Finland, Cali, Colombia, Berlin, and London. This is happening as well for the Caribbean coast, for the Pacific coast in Colombia, since the beginning of the 20th century in the music landscape, and obviously for music and for dance. So just to summarize, there is a huge spectrum of possibility, which is not only a concession really, which has been given to the black people, the expression of Afro aspects. It is really a space which has been fought for and that has been worn for more than 100 years in the music industry, in the record industry. It is a pathway really to understand, I believe, this scene. Do you think there are specific reasons for which, for example, there are so many divisions among these different aspects of artistic Afro production in Colombia? So you have the Colombian salsa, plastic arts is in a different aspect, and dance is differently from the other two. Although there is a movement of contemporary dance and Afro contemporary dance in Colombia, it is not seen in galleries and in museums. Why do you think there is this clear division between the contemporary art and other Afro-Colombian arts? I think this is due to the fact that Bogota is basically the center, the hub, which sort of drags or dredge everything really that is done in Bogota. In my opinion, for example, in the 90s, any artist, Afro-Colombia or not, could create a name without or outside Bogota. I had, for example, artists, I've known them that had some of his or her work in the most important art fair, but these were artists who lived outside Bogota due to economic reasons. They couldn't live in Bogota. I remember artists from Bucaramanga, from Barranquilla, from Cali, they couldn't afford to live in Bogota, and therefore they had to disappear for a long time for that reason, because they couldn't afford to live in Bogota. And it was Bogota where the museums were, the galleries were. So this has changed now. It has changed a lot. because today we have residencies with international names, like in Cali, in Barranquilla, you have La Usurpadora, for example. In the 90s, this wasn't possible. Either you were in Bogota or you didn't exist for art. So I believe this advantage. I don't know if the artists of the different regions are making the most of it, although there are some regional forums or fair. I don't know if these regional um, uh, arts exhibitions, if they do have some influence on what is going on in Bogota. But in my experience in the 90s, it was a very centrality, a very strong center, Bogota-centered
Sí,
dynamics.
yo creo que es que también
You had to be in Bogota to be
este espacio
someone.
geográfico del que habla Ramiro
Yes, that
se
geographic
acentúa y
space that Ramiro was talking about,
se refuerza
it is
no solo
strengthened
por
not
las
only because
barreras que
of the
existen a nivel
barriers which existed
cultural,
within the art, the plastic and contemporary art world or the exhibition art,
sino que justamente
but
se vuelve
precisely it has to do with everything which has to do with the structure, really.
entender que las escuelas de arte
Basically, just to understand that the art schools, and we go back to the first question, the art schools which train professionally those who would then be artists like us.
pues no tenían un
And
énfasis
those art schools,
marcado
they didn't have a very
en la
much
formación
strong emphasis for the
plástica
visual plastic
era una
training
expresión
to be also a completely
por supuesto legítima y normal
legitimate or normal
en cualquier lugar del mundo.
expression within the
Entonces era
black communities.
se
So
convirtió en una
it
herramienta, yo creo, en una forma de
became
formación
more a way of
que
strengthening
también
the idea that
tiene
if
varias
you want to
aplicaciones en la
exercise
música.
art, being a black person, either you had
Hay
to
también una
dance
especie de
or perform
estereotipo
music. So there is a kind of a stereotyping
de cuáles son las artes
of
permitidas en
which
ese
are the
momento.
arts permitted
Y mira,
in
entonces
this regard, because
la
when we,
representación
not only in the 90s, but even today, when we go to the artist training programs, like in the Chocó knowledge, for example, these art schools, when they, in the last few years before the students um, graduate in high school, the possibilities of working in art is basically music, and that's it, it's only music. You do have some conductors, but basically you don't have enough number of professionals in the visual arts. So I think it has to do with the structuring aspect of education in the scenarios where you foster people, you encourage people to participate in those galleries and museums and exhibitions, as you mentioned.
Gracias.
Okay, thank you.
Carmenza, ¿me escuchas? Estoy intentando hablar con Carmenza a través del canal en inglés.
Carmenza,
Will, you would need to change the channel to English.
¿me
Yeah,
oyes?
Yeah.
I've already done it.
Oh, yeah, really? Okay.
I'm on the English channel.
No, me pueden escuchar.
Sí, ahí yo la escucho.
I can't hear her.
Ahí,
¿Me escuchan?
Sí,
ahí yo te escucho.
Sí, ya se escuchó.
Bueno, en lo personal, hola, ¿cómo están?
Okay, so personally,
La relación con los eventos culturales, folclóricas, en este caso como artista, eh, también ha sido un poco también de resistencia. Creo
so as an artist, it's basically to try to resist. I believe during the last few years,
la invitación a de esta movida, estos centros culturales, tiende a
so I think basically these cultural centers is more like
como a cumplimientos estatal un poco. Y entonces, por ejemplo, en el personal siempre he visto tener participaciones en meses como el febrero o en mayo, porque febrero para muchas
Like, for example, most of these institutions are focused in February or March.
y en mayo pues Colombia se
And in May,
comillas, la herencia. Entonces,
there's important celebration in Colombia.
únicamente como para y poder así abrir un poco como la brecha y dejar de ser como la voz de estos meses.
Vale,
Escuchando
gracias.
muy mal.
Sí.
Sí, no.
Yes, the audio is very bad. We can't really hear what you're saying.
Quizás intentas apagar la cámara un rato,
If you try to turn off your camera, the connection could improve.
Yes, that would be good.
It is the Wi-Fi connection,
si
yes.
puedes apagar la cámara un
Could you
rato.
please turn off the camera, Carmenza?
Sí, intenta ahí hablar, a ver.
And try to speak to see if it improves a little bit.
Aló. Está escribiendo que continuemos, Carmenza, seguramente.
Ok.
She wants us to carry on.
Entonces,
Okay, so
aunque, aunque Bogotá
although
no sea
Bogota
como
is
el único centro
not
de arte en
the
Colombia,
only
todavía
artistic center in Colombia
sigue
anymore,
siendo el centro más
it is
importante
still
de
the
Colombia.
main contemporary art center in
¿Esto
Colombia.
qué significa
And my question is,
en
what does this
relación
mean
al
with regards to
financiamiento
the funding
o
state or funding of the
de
sub-state
las otras
funding
regiones,
of the other regions,
específicamente
more specifically
el Chocó y la costa?
for the Choco and for
O
the
sea, ¿qué
coastal
significa? ¿Cuál
areas?
es el
I mean,
rol de la
what is
ubicación
the
del
role
Centro
of the
Contemporáneo Afro en Colombia?
development of Afro contemporary art in Colombia? I mean, and the
Yo
importance of
creo
the
que
location.
de pronto una cosa que Ramiro ha
I
estado
think
mencionando hace
something
un
that
rato que tiene que ver con la
something that
forma
Ramiro has
en
been talking
que
about a few
nacionalmente
minutes ago is the way that nationally we encourage
tiene una forma
artistic production.
digamos, el formato más
I mean,
conocido y
the
más
most
grande
widely known format is the
es el
Artist
Foro de
National
Bogotá, es itinerante,
Room
pero
or
según
Forum, which
según
is
lo que
not only
Ramiro
happening in
menciona,
Bogota, it goes around
el
different
año
regions in
pasado
the country, but then it is complemented with the
las
regional
foros regionales han sido
uh,
los que más fuertes
events, which
han
had been
estimulado
the platforms where
estas
these
escenas locales
there has been an encouragement for the regional
como el
events,
Pacífico entero, entonces de
like
Cali hasta acá,
the whole Pacific from
hasta
Cali to
Cauca,
Cauca
Mariño,
until the Cauca, even until
la costa
Marino,
mediterránea,
the Caribbean coast as
Estados
well,
Unidos,
with
y yo creo que
has
justamente la forma
participated, and I
específica
believe it
en
has
donde
been the way in which the money has been
el
circulating
esfuerzo
around,
sí ha estado muy
and
concentrado y es
the
reconocerlo, yo creo,
uh, the
esta
effort really
forma
has been
que se
concentrated. It is
está
the idea of trying to have this autonomy. And Ramiro could also explain this better than myself. But I think that since the 90s, there has been a great difference to what we can see today. And in most of the regions that Ramiro has mentioned, we have in Cali and we have in other areas, we do have a strong um, regions with a strong art
y eso tiene que ver mucho con que
centers,
progresivamente
and this has to do with the idea that gradually the money has been circulated in a different direction. Obviously, funding is going to be it's not going to be enough. And in the country, specifically for the arts, it has been very much marked by the politics. The way in which we conceive culture for our country, it is always a political position, which is very much disputed, but at the same time, it is a way to just position the political agendas of the different governments. And the Minister of Culture who is an Afro-descendant, she doesn't have any connection whatsoever with the art. She does have a political connection with the president. And with regards to the pandemic, something which is not new but has been seen now, it is the way of how money fundings, which should have been destined to culture, is being going to the what we call the orange economies, which are the cultural industries, which is a political project of this government to finance, to definance the individual or the autonomous independent artistic production which has been growing in the different territories. And this is a reaffirmation of the fact that culture is completely politicized in this aspect and very much linked to the memory of what we want to tell and what is the narrative we want to put out there and what we want to be seen as the national memory. In this particular aspect, I will have to go back in history. In my experience, at least, I remember one of the things that we've managed to achieve with the Afro-Colombian movement in the 90s was the Law 70 from 1993, which created the rights of Afro-descendant communities. It was a national project, if you wish, that basically could be applied to different levels. I don't know until what extent this was further studied. Also, we have to mention that this Law 1122 from the Ministry of Education also implemented the subject of the Afro-Colombian studies. So, I mean, these kind of projects, I think these are interesting. I mean, in my opinion, policies which will benefit to a particular group, they are not positively regarded. I remember at the National University, we had a program called Program for Students from Poor or Underprivileged students, which basically the best students for a municipality with less than 10,000 inhabitants, they will have direct access to the national universities without any request of exams. I saw cases during my time at the university. I saw a student like Ponedere town in the Atlantic coast. He could never really even dream of going to study in Barranquilla because he came from a very, very poor family. He could have access to the National University and to have an education as anybody else. Although many people don't regard this kind of project as positive, I think they help us to have this more balanced system. We do have some specific scholarships for some ethnic groups. I think there should be some special scholarship for some Afro-Colombian population or some indigenous population to really balance even more these demographics and this representation. But this has to be a continuous policy, which obviously we don't have this in Colombia. As something that has taken very short period of time. Thank you. So we're going to start with some questions from the public. I have the first one here in English. I'm going to read it.
Entonces, en términos de la
So with regards to the invisibility
de arte afro en Colombia,
of the
¿cuáles
Afro
son o
art
fueron
in Colombia, which has been
la influencia positiva
the positive influence
del internet,
of internet
las redes
and
sociales
social
y
media
la tecnología?
and technology?
Y cómo,
Yes.
cuál ha
How
sido la influencia positiva
which has been the positive influence of internet and technology in the
de arte
greater
afro-colombiano?
visibility of Afro art in Colombia. So what I think is that not only for the Afro art, but also I mean, obviously today we do have more global visibility. We're not associated to a very specific art space, and artists have more access to information. Even artists couldn't apply to international residency. Today, he or she is able to do this, and obviously this is an advantage that, I don't know, in my time when there was a call for paper that was published in a notice board, and those who were in Bogota who went to the ISATEX, I mean, I wanted to go there because I wanted to go abroad, but that was the only place where you could see the call for papers. It was on a notice board, and they said that this wasn't published in a wider way because they only wanted a few people and very specific people to be able to apply. But everything now is open. You can go to the internet and everything is more sort of more readily available. So that, for example, is a positive example, I would say. The experience is very extreme, as Ramiro is telling us. But yes, obviously it could happen that it would be a very utopic view to think of internet as the main change that can really bring different worlds together. But if there are some structuring aspects which had not been sorted out in the different territories and even in Bogota, in Cali, in Cartagena themselves, it's not really the access which can make the difference in terms of visibility or invisibility. Obviously, it contributes. It's really a tool. But what we are trying to talk about here when we talk about invisibility is discourses and structures, which are material structures which pose a hurdle for our representations to go forward, not only as the circulation of images, but as the uh, expression or the allowed expression. Talking about the Afro-descendant women and men and artists with different orientations in the museums in this country. In the largest collection, which is the Museum of the Bank of the Republic Museum, these kind of representations don't even reach 2%. There could be a process of visibility or gradual visibility. The internet could speed up, could help to speed up. But if we're talking about the policies of acquisitions, if we're talking about the exhibition spaces, if we're talking about the funding of careers and education, internet is just going to be just a tap on the shoulder. To have internet or not is going to be just a tap on the shoulder, really. It's not going to make that great of a difference. However, younger people, especially younger women, Afro-descendant younger women in Cali, in Bogota, in Barranquilla as well, in Medellin, they are creating space. I'm going to tell you about three projects which I believe they are very well centered and very well thought about the internet too. One is the Savache Arte. You can look it up in Instagram. And the Savache Arte, they have a very elegant way of showing and exposing the Black art and the universe of younger generations, which are very much connected with the Dominican Republic, with New York. So there's a very international perspective on diverse arts like music, visual arts, performance, and it has been an effort which is very valuable to make this online platform, which has been codified and as Instagram, and to turn it into a gallery. Another project I could mention is Plientitude, which is a project of Laura Campasa in Cali, and she's preparing a catalog. It is a catalog of visual Afro-Colombian artists. It is very worthy to see it because if we want to do this exercise, which we could think it is an easy thing to do in internet, but we don't have any basic catalog where we put together the names and some kind of information on the people, the artists producing this kind of art. And in a more sort of interdisciplinary domain, we have the Widamuni Congo, which is a visual art collective. We have Ms. Angulo, she's a great Colombian artist. Liliana Angulo, she's also part of this, and also Mr. Perea, as Ramiro said, and also younger people from other processes. They are all involved in this particular one. And there has been an effort of amplifying and bringing more people and bringing more exhibitions, especially of Afro-descendant visual art with cinema exhibitions, with workshops. And these are spaces which are very valuable, and they are contributing to this greater visibility from the social networks and social media. We do have more questions on the influence of artists,
afrocolombianos
Afro-Colombian
en el
artists
continente.
in the continent, in the
Y están preguntando
whole
si,
continent.
si, bueno,
And the question has to do with the fact if you have heard about this influence in the whole continent and how
afrocolombianos
Afro-Colombian artists had influenced other people and artists in the American,
Rica, Panamá,
in
Venezuela,
Latin America, like Brazil, Costa Rica, Panama, Peru, Ecuador.
Yo creo que hay que hablar, Ramiro,
I think we have to talk about,
como quizás el referente más activo, siendo ella muy joven igual,
I mean,
y con un trabajo
we have to talk about, for example, different
de
artists
curaduría, de
with
digital,
the digital aspects from public policy, from
el
plastic
trabajo de
work,
ella,
and
bueno,
her work, which is
créeme que si no ha
huge.
tenido
I think
algún tipo
if there has been some kind
no
of
solo la influencia, sino de
not only the
conexiones
influence but also the
diaspóricas
connections of the
en la región,
diaspora
pues yo conozco
connections in the region.
casos
I
puntuales,
don't know specific cases, but
pero sé que, por ejemplo,
I think, for
con
example, a
este de
project which is a recent project of hers.
con el que me interesa mucho el perfil con el
I'm
que
really
ella
interested
está
in the
pensando
uh,
la producción de arte.
train of thought of
Por
her
ejemplo,
art production, which has to do with
reparaciones históricas, mirando hacia el pasado,
performing or conducting
sí,
historic
rescates históricos, por ejemplo, en España, en el Archivo Civil,
repair, for example, in the civil
con
archives in Spain.
para
I'm
mostrar la
making of
presencia
this
de
a very
artistas
important
en Colombia,
uh,
artistas, digamos, negros,
aspect to talk about the
eh,
presence of black
desde la
artists
expedición
from the
botánica
botanic
hacia
expedition. We have Celestina Mutis in the 18th century, for example,
con artistas
drawers
afrodescendientes,
also who were there in that expedition, and they were black like Walter Rizzo,
si no estoy mal el nombre,
if I'm not mistaken his name,
poniendo también
but also
ciertas,
showing that
ciertos artistas y
as not only
artistas
to acknowledge the artists, but also that
de
the
la expedición botánica
botanic expedition
esa colonia
was a
esclavista. Y en
colonial
ese proceso,
slavery
ese margen
linked
históricamente
company.
está la
And I think to talk about
y eso
this,
necesita
and
entender que eso es un
here
proceso
is where we have the willingness to understand that this is a continental
y en ese
process in the
sentido
case of
abrir la
America.
conversación
And with this
para
regard is to open up a conversation. It's not talking just about Colombia and its specificities, but what have we had in common with our nearest neighbors and obviously with the Atlantic world.
Ramiro.
Yo
Ramiro,
desconozco porque, como digo, no he
I
estado en la
don't
región
know it because, as I said, I haven't lived in the
y
region recently for a long time, so I don't think
ahora
I
que mencionas
could
irán más
say anything. I mean, it would be more as an exception than the norm if I mention something. What Nicolás has mentioned is very important. I would like to contribute with anything else, but I don't think at this moment I could think of other artists that Colombian artists which had been a great influence in the rest of Latin
Otro
America.
artista
There's
que
another artist
internacional
as
como Botero
international and
y si me
Colombian
recuerdo
artist as
ella
Botero,
o alguien
and
de
if
Botero
they or someone as Botero,
si realmente ha hablado
if have they
de la, bueno, de
talked
la representación
about the
afro
representation or the Afro
en el
representation in
continente africano.
Colombia, or this manifestation, this expression? No, as long as I'm aware, no.
a mí lo que me llama la atención
ni Botero ni otros artistas. Y
No
yo
Botero or other artists. I think Nicolás is performing a research on the Afro-Colombian representation of modern and contemporary art, which could shed more lights on this. Yes, I think this topic very shortly, trying to summarize this. We've had a tradition of visual representation of plastic arts of Black people, which has been more towards the representation of white people, or what we call white mixed race, of uh, what we have seen traditionally in Colombia. I was talking about the Afro-Colombian artists' participation in the main museums, not as artists. What it shows that if we're going to have representation of Black people, this representation is going to be made by a white person. So here we have Guillermo Biderman, we have Hernando Tejada, we have also Julio Abril, Tena Rodriguez. So we have sculptures of modern um, of some representations of with a very interesting plastic approach, but at the end of the day what it shows is that we haven't had a way of seeing ourselves, of representing ourselves in the main museums. I mean, it is not that they didn't exist. They did exist, but in the different places, those who are going to exhibit about Black people during many years is white artists. I mean, if we want to talk about Black women, we're going to see what Osorio did to go to Palenque to portray Black women and girls. And this pattern of representation, I mean, this has to do with a political agenda. These are not isolated cases. It is not a coincidence. There is a way of blocking a lack of representation in our own terms, because they don't want mobilization processes or greater identification processes. Luckily, this is not going to be enough to stop us. I mean, and these spaces are being conquered, and these images are going to be defeated. I mean, just to say something that it has nothing to do specifically on the ethnicity, Colombia ethnicity. I mean, the first statue that was put down in this sort of fashion of putting down slavery-related statues in a place, the statue which was put down on the conquistadors or the Spanish invaders, and this has to do with conquering these spaces of visibility that we want to conquer now. Thank you. So many different aspects I would like to share with you, but unfortunately we don't have more time. So thank you very much for your participation today. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being here so early and waking up so early to stay with us here. It is the end of this conversation, although we still have so many things, interesting things to talk about. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass the floor to Julia.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. It was very interesting, and I wished I could just continue listening to you like for several more hours. So let's see how we can actually, make something more out of this to have more time and space to discuss these issues or write about these topics. So I think it's very, very important what both of you have mentioned. And we're so sorry, Carmenza. I don't know whether you're hearing us. Very sorry that you couldn't join the conversation. We will find also other ways to somehow have a space where you can talk about your practice. So we will be in touch about that. So sorry. So we coming to an end now. We just wanted to let the audience know that there is another final panel coming up in an hour from now, which is called Relationship Status. It's complicated. which is looking into the situation in the context of the artistic scenes in Mexico, Peru, and Argentina. This will be also very interesting and kind of really closing in into certain aspects, I think, also that you've mentioned here already on this panel. So thank you again to all of you. And just remember, for those who maybe came in late, who have friends who missed the talk, this talk was recorded, so you can also see it on the 154 YouTube channel or listen to it on the Spotify podcast by 154. So please do to make sure that you get all the interesting info that was said here today. So thank you so much, and see you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Yeah? Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye. See you soon.
Gracias. Hasta